Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We have a very special episode today of Daily Palantir. We have a brand new Alex Karp interview from the Davos Summit. He's been going to the summit since 2019, so this is his 5th time being there, and we have to break down a 10-minute interview that he did with Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC. Now, this episode's going to be just breaking down that interview. There is a lot of news we got this week. I mean, we got Shyam Sankar doing a bunch of different podcasts. We have new stuff going on in the Davos Summit, and Karp talking at the Axios part of that summit, talking about different things. We've got a new book that's coming out from Alex Karp. I mean, as a Palantir content creator, this is quite literally just heaven. 2024 starting off with the CEO of the company that I cover daily and have been covering daily for the past 2 years. He's coming out with an entire book. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I'm going to wait to talk about all that stuff tomorrow on Friday. Because today's episode is going to be just reserved for the interview that we have to break down. There were some really interesting points in this interview. He talked about the business side of Palantir, doubled down on some statements over the past 2 months. So I think there's a lot of gems. And really, I tweeted about some thought-provoking things that he said in the interview that I want to break down today. Now, I just came back from California. I was in California interviewing Meet Kevin. Meet Kevin, big finance YouTube personality. He manages $40 million in an ETF called PP. He recently bought Palantir at $18, I think like 80,000 shares a month ago. So we talked about Palantir as well. That part of the interview will be shown on this channel tomorrow. I'm not going to post the entire interview on this channel. I'm actually going to launch a new channel where I can talk more about macro, economy, Jerome Powell, because I don't want to flood your guys' feeds that primarily come to this channel for Palantir. So I'm starting a different channel. If you're interested in that channel, you'll be able to subscribe tomorrow, and I'll show you guys the link. But that channel will have the full Meet Kevin interview talking about a bunch of stuff. The stuff he said about Palantir, let's just say he's bullish. He's very, very bullish. And so tomorrow I'm excited to bring that to you guys so you guys can check it out. But today, Karp Davos. All right, so here's how I'm going to break down this reaction. Arnie posted the entire interview on his Twitter, so I'll leave that in the description. That's where Karp talks about like recruiting and all this type of stuff. I'm going to be reacting to the 6-minute version that CNBC posted, which primarily deals with Karp's thoughts on Israel and anti-Semitism. Now, the reason this is so important is because that's what majority of the interview was about, right? They were basically just asking him like why he's so public about this, why he's thinking about this. Out of the entire 10-minute interview, that was kind of the core part that Andrew Ross Sorkin, the host, wanted to focus on. But number two, if you're a Palantir shareholder, like this really matters because Karp's stance on Israel and Palantir's explicitly public stance on Israel definitely influences not just the business, but the stock, if investors want to buy it, if companies want to do business with them. Like, it is very important to get clarity if you're a shareholder on how the CEO is thinking and his logic of actually being so public about this. So that's what we're going to react to right now. One line that I don't think is in the CNBC interview that I just wanted to share with everybody is a very quick part of the longer interview was Karp said, our US commercial product is growing so rapidly that we might have to start rebuilding the entire company to be able to keep up with the demand. So the one takeaway, if all you care about is what Karp had to say about Palantir, the business, that was the one line that I heard from the interview that was incredible to hear. And we kind of knew AIP was scaling. We knew bootcamps were doing well. Now in Q4, we are going to actually see if the numbers are there and if the guidance is there for the rest of the year. Because you can say AIP scaling and we have to rebuild the business, hire all these people. That's great. But show me it in the guidance. So the guidance, I think, is ultimately going to implicate how Palantir does based on what they say on that Q4 earnings, which also, I forgot to mention, is happening February 5th. We got that news yesterday. That is coming out February 5th, and it'll be after hours on Monday. Of course, I will be streaming it on this channel. All right, let's get into Karp and see what he had to say about peace, war, Israel, and anti-Semitism.
A wide-ranging interview. I started out by asking him about his recent trip to Israel.
The main reason I went is because we corporate leaders, especially corporate leaders who are running publicly traded companies, need to stop just parroting things we don't believe when it's popular and then being silent when it's a little more controversial.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we have all these, we had a movement, I think it's fading away, largely understood as wokeism, where people said, quite frankly, in public, lots of things that no one believed they believed in private. Now with Israel, most people in positions of authority realize that what happened on October 7th was one of the worst terror attacks the West has ever seen, arguably the worst act of terrorism and sexual barbarism the world has seen in 100 years. And it is incumbent on us to actually not only speak loudly in private, but occasionally show what we mean in public. And so core to defending the West for me was not just me going to Israel. I'm very well known there. Our products are used there. I'm proud of that. But bringing the whole board and saying, look, you know, you can debate lots of things about Israel, but the people who are attacking it are calling into question the very existence of a thoroughly democratic Western country that is defending our rights and we cannot just speak loudly in private. And one of the key issues that you find, including here, is, people want to talk about rebuilding trust. The elite, no one trusts the elite. Yes, but how could you trust the elite if everything you're saying is a half-truth at best?
You ran a full.
So he's about to drop the hammer, Karp, in terms of what he says next. But what he said right there was incredibly important. I mean, ultimately, his argument is like, look, the reason we went there was because you can disagree on a lot of nuanced things that go back, hundreds of years when you're debating what Israel is doing and all this other stuff, but you cannot debate their right to exist. And the calls we're seeing right now is that the country itself, which is fairly democratic, it's not the perfect democracy, but it's much more democratic than some of the other places across the world that will, give you the boot if you cheat on your husband or something. That is where we have to draw the line in terms of calling into question the very existence of it. And that's why Karp made it that point. Now, what he's going to say in the next couple minutes also, I think, is going to be really important and thought-provoking, especially as a shareholder of Palantir that might be on the edge of them being as public about their stance.
Full-page ad in the New York Times after the tragedy that we saw in Israel. You were the only company that I saw do anything like that. What was the reaction to that from your fellow CEOs?
Look, there are a lot of people who are like, you're beep, beep crazy. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. People are going to call up and yell at you. And my reaction to them was, is never again mean I never take the risk of my own career? Is like, it was always hard in history to stand up against discrimination, brutal acts, pogroms, sexual violence. We are at the point where you have to stand up. And, the interesting thing is, in private, a lot of people agree with me. Their position is, but you can't say it in public because you'll offend someone. And this is exactly wrong. You can no longer live in a world where you are not saying something that will offend, you only say things that will offend no one. Like, if you're going to defend something, you have to defend it.
But then what's your view about companies that were speaking out on lots of other social issues that I think you don't think that they believed in?
So
now this is good pushback, because basically Ross Sorkin's like, well, why don't you talk about trans rights or BLM or the Me Too movement? Why are you only talking about Israel? And this is where I think Karp gives a pretty interesting answer.
The core reason why people who are basically decent, wonderful people in America have basically no trust in the elite is everyone senses that they spoke out on things they actually don't believe in, and they set a precedent. The precedent that they set was, I'm going to speak out about moral causes. Okay, now you have a crucial moral cause. Like, you can be against what I'm saying. You could be against standing with Israel. You can't say you don't have an opinion. You don't have an opinion on this. You have fallen on your head. And if there are people in corporate America who say, look, I never have an opinion. My opinion is the shareholders. I actually am sympathetic with them. But if you spent the last 5 years lecturing us about all sorts of things that no one believes you believe in private, you can't just wake up the next day and say, oh, I can't speak about this thing I believe, right, or say I have no opinion. And it is crazy ridiculous, and it undermines the fabric of our democracy because no one believes it.
Let me ask you about what...
Now, that is what I wanted to react to. Again, I'll leave the full video in the description if you guys want to check it out. But that was kind of the core essence of the interview that I wanted to talk about. All right, let's break that down. So this is really, really interesting, and it was incredibly thought-provoking to me as a shareholder. I think about Karp a lot. I think about his ideas a lot, his ideologies, the way he speaks about things. I did not, for the past couple months, as Karp's been going on his public stance of Israel since October, I have not thought about it in this way. And it really made me appreciate being a Palantir shareholder. And it honestly took the edge off of feeling that they were so public about this, given how he framed it. Okay, so Andrew Ross Sorkin is like, that's great. You're public. You had a full New York Times commercial, all that stuff, right? Like, we get it. But there is a world in which you could lose some business because you're doing this. And then Karp says, well, if we're going to say never again, if we're going to say we're not going to let something like the Holocaust happen again, we're not going to let it get to that level, then I have to put my life at risk as well sometimes. And then, which is a good answer, and then Ross Sorkin comes back and says, wait a second, why aren't you putting your life on the risk for other issues, trans rights, BLM, Me Too? Like, why don't you speak out about those things if you're going to speak out about this? And this is where Karp, my level of respect for him increases even more. He does not care about those issues as much as he cares about this issue. You can agree with that. You can disagree with that. That is what he believes. And what he says is that the corporate elite, the reason they have no trust in the general public, which I think if you just look at polls of the general public, like, people do not trust the Jeff Bezos, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is these guys come out and they try to lecture you and me about how we should think about the world, how we should think about capitalism, how we should think about gender relations, racial relations, how we should internalize the fact that white privilege exists, even though you see a lot of white people in rural areas and they're, not doing the best. They're in much more poor conditions. They're, dying because of all these drugs, and you're trying to push this narrative down. That's just one example. You can agree or disagree. But the point is, there is a overarching ideological dogmatic viewpoint that many elite CEOs and companies have tried to stuff down people's throat. You can agree with it or you can disagree with it. The point is, the objective point is, that has happened over the past 5 years. And none of these CEOs, and this is the thing that really got me thinking from what Karp was saying, actually give a shit. And here's why they don't actually give a shit. Because they can say those things and know they will get minimal backlash because it is the politically correct thing to say. Therefore, their stock or their company or their employees won't push back at them. But when it comes to Israel and Hamas, I think no matter what your opinion is, objectively you can say this was one of the most barbaric terrorist attacks we've seen in the past century, as Karp says, and definitely one of the worst terrorist attacks we've seen since 9/11. I mean, it takes 2 ounces of research to understand that that was the case. And if you don't believe it was a terrorist attack, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. But that is what happened. And so Karp says, wait a second, when something like that happens, especially to a group that has gone through something like the Holocaust, and as a public CEO, you want to speak about X, Y, and Z, but you don't want to speak about this thing? You have no opinion on this thing that happened because you're afraid of what people are going to say? And in private, you're telling me that you absolutely 1000% support Israel, but in public, you're not willing to say that? That's when I believe Palantir, that's when I believed it ultimately made sense for Palantir to publicly support Israel, because they may not care about all the other stuff going on in the world, but they care about this. And you could argue for good reason this matters a lot more than other things that are happening. And so it's time to take a public stance, especially because it's affecting Western democratic values. And, the collapse of Israel as a state with the right to exist is not good for the world. Let's just put it like that. And so Karp and Palantir, they think about really big macro philosophical stuff. They don't think about day-to-day things that happen in the world. And Israel not existing is a very big macro geopolitical thing that would upend the entire world in terms of the wars and all the different things that it would cause. And we're seeing that already in the past 5 months post October 7th. So that's what they're speaking out about. And whether you agree or disagree, you can't say you don't believe that they're authentically speaking out about this. But if Zuckerberg comes out and says something about social issues tomorrow, I don't know if I can believe him. I don't know if I can believe Bezos. I don't know if I can believe them. It's hard to believe Target or Walmart CEOs in terms of what they say. And so this is the perspective shift that fundamentally changed for how I think about their support of Israel. I believe their support of Israel makes sense in the context of not only their business, but also their philosophical Western values and upholding those Western values. I think the critique that Karp is pointing towards the other CEOs is that in private they support Israel, in public they're not willing to say anything, and no one believes them because for the past 5 years they've been lecturing everybody on what to believe, even though they don't even believe that shit. If you just look at their actions, they definitely don't believe a lot of the stuff they've said, just given how they've acted, given how the companies have acted. But they'll put up, a gay flag pride banner on the website on Amazon to show their support. But they don't actually care. So they're lecturing about things they don't care about. And the reason they don't care about them is because they know that if they say something, nothing's going to happen. You care about something when you have something to lose. There has to be a sacrifice. And so if you said something about Israel, you maybe have some business to lose. But that's the price of saying something. That's what it means to stand up for something. And that's why none of these companies are doing so, because they actually know they have something to lose and, business could go bad. But when it comes to putting a gay pride flag on your website, no one's really going to care that much. Yeah, you might lose some customers that are, that don't like you being political. But for the far majority, no one's going to stop shopping on Amazon because you put a gay pride flag up on the website. So that's why they're going to do it. That's why they're going to take a stance. But they don't really care. When it comes to something that you should care about objectively, you should have an opinion on it at least. You don't have to be pro-Israel, but you have to have an opinion on what happened on October 7th. And you don't even share your opinion? Or you put out some stupid little press statement the day after and you condemn the attacks and then you move on. You don't actually make a statement. That's where I think you need to draw the line between what's happening in corporate America and what the most innovative tech companies in the world that are trying to stop that shit from happening again are actually doing. And that is why I thought this interview was fantastic. It is a new perspective that I have not gotten from Palantir's Alex Karp before on this issue, and it really did change my mind. So overall, amazing thoughts, and it changed my mind in terms of just understanding why they've been so public. Like, I've always supported them being public. That part always made sense to me. It changed my mind on why they've been so explicitly public. It's not just because they want to have a public stance. It's because this is the one time where you're supposed to have a public stance, and the other CEOs are not doing it because they're afraid, which means they never actually cared about the other public stances they've had before. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. A lot of news to cover over the coming days. A lot of stuff. Meet Kevin's thoughts on Palantir. Karp's writing a book. There's a ton of stuff to cover, but let me know your guys' thoughts on what Karp said today, because I thought it was definitely thought-provoking in terms of his opinions on what's going on with Israel. Thank you guys for listening and watching. A lot more coverage coming up soon. I'll see you guys tomorrow.